In a quiet town, a lost German shepherd wandered the streets, alone and hungry. But when a little girl went missing, this unlikely hero's life would change forever. What he did next shocked everyone, and it's something you need to hear. Before I show you what this German shepherd did, can I ask you something small? If you believe that no child should ever face fear alone, please hit that subscribe button. Most people scroll past stories like this, but with your one click, you can help this message reach someone who really needs to hear it. The day had started like any other in Westbrook, quiet, serene, with the kind of peace that small towns are known for. The streets were empty in the early hours, save for a few early risers walking their dogs or heading to work, the cool morning air filling their lungs. But for one person, this morning would be anything but ordinary. At precisely 7:15 a.m., 10-year-old Emily Davis had set out for her usual morning ride around the block. Emily was a child known for her energy, always out exploring, always curious about the world around her. A neighborhood bike ride was something she did nearly every day, a routine she had stuck to since she first learned to ride at the age of 6. The other kids in town always admired her for her fearless spirit, whether it was riding her bike in the wind or running barefoot through the dewy grass, challenging herself to explore every inch of the small town. That morning, Emily had set out, as she always did, with a grin on her face and the world at her feet. Her bike, a second-hand mountain bike with peeling paint and worn-out tires, was her trusted companion. She loved the feeling of the wind against her skin as she zipped down the streets, the sound of the tires on the pavement a familiar rhythm in her ears. Her parents, Sarah and Michael Davis, were still in bed. They had no reason to suspect anything unusual. Westbrook, though small, had always been considered a safe place, a town where children could roam freely without a second thought. There had never been any incidents, no threats to the safety of the community, and certainly no reason to believe that anything would change today. The Davis family had lived in Westbrook for years, and like everyone else in the town, they had come to trust its peaceful nature. But then, just as the sun began to climb higher in the sky, things started to shift. Emily's mother, Sarah, had just finished making breakfast when she glanced out the kitchen window. She noticed Emily's bike lying abandoned by the side of the street, near the corner of Maple and 3rd. It was odd. Emily had never been the type to leave her bike unattended. She was always careful with her things. But this wasn't just carelessness. It felt wrong. A cold knot began to form in Sarah's stomach. She called out to her husband, Michael, asking if he'd seen Emily. But Michael, still groggy, had no answer. He assumed she was off on another of her morning adventures. But as the minutes stretched on and the clock ticked past 8 a.m., Sarah's worry grew. It was unlike Emily to be gone for so long without checking in. She grabbed her coat and stepped outside, scanning the block. There was no sign of her. It was around 8:30 a.m. when Sarah called Michael again. This time, there was a tremor in her voice. "Something's not right," she said, her eyes scanning every corner of their block. "Emily's bike, it's still there. She's not answering." Michael, now fully awake, bolted out of the house and headed down the street. Neighbors who were beginning to step out of their homes greeted him, but there was no word of Emily. No one had seen her. Now, panic began to set in. Emily was a smart girl. If something had happened, she would have found a way to reach out, wouldn't she? Sarah tried to remain calm, but every passing minute made her stomach churn with unease. She called out to the neighbors, asking if they'd seen anything, but no one had. The street was eerily still, the silence hanging over the neighborhood like a thick fog. By 9 a.m., Michael had called the police. It was the logical next step, but something about calling the authorities felt final. It was the moment when something went from unusual to serious. The dispatcher on the other end of the line had assured him that the police would be on their way soon. But still, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a simple case of a missing child. There was a heaviness in the air, something he couldn't explain. By noon, Westbrook was on high alert. The local police had set up a command center in the town hall, and Sarah and Michael were told to stay put while the authorities began their investigation. But neither of them could sit still. They paced the floors, their minds racing through all the possibilities. Was she kidnapped? Did she wander too far and get lost? Soon, the search effort was in full swing. Dozens of neighbors and family members, people who had known each other for years, gathered in the town square, ready to spread out and search for Emily. People who had once shared barbecue dinners and holiday festivities were now suddenly united by fear. Everyone had a role. Some took to the woods, others checked local parks, and some simply walked the streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of her or a piece of evidence. Max, the stray German shepherd, was one of those who found his way into the search. He had been wandering the town for months now, a silent observer to the human activity around him. Some people had fed him scraps, others simply ignored him, but no one ever really considered him a part of the community. But now, Max's presence was different. His instincts were sharp, and though no one had called on him, he seemed to understand that something was wrong. He followed the group, silently slipping through the streets, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of Westbrook. He knew that something was out of place, and there was a strange urgency in the way he moved. It was as if he, too, could sense the rising panic. As the hours turned to evening, the search continued, but there were still no answers. The town had descended into a state of anxious uncertainty. No one was sleeping, no one was resting. Parents kept their children close, whispering reassurances, even as they too were filled with dread. As night fell, so did the atmosphere over Westbrook. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the once bustling town seemed to be holding its breath. The cries of a missing child echoed through the empty streets. The searchers returned, empty-handed. They had scoured every possible location, but there was still no sign of Emily. It had been over 24 hours since Emily vanished, and by now, the entire town was shaking with fear. Westbrook, once so tranquil and safe, had become a town on edge. Everyone was looking over their shoulders, wondering who, or what, could have taken Emily. But the truth was, there were no clues, no suspicious cars, no odd behavior from any of the townspeople. It was as if Emily had simply vanished from the face of the earth. The police had their own theories. They began to look into the possibility of foul play. Had someone from out of town come to Westbrook and taken Emily? Had she run away for some reason? But the idea that a 10-year-old girl could disappear so thoroughly without leaving any trace, it didn't sit right. Neighbors continued to gather at the Davis home, their faces filled with concern. Some tried to console Sarah and Michael, but there was an unspoken understanding among them all. They were all afraid. No one knew where Emily was, or who had taken her, or why. And with each passing hour, their dread grew deeper. The days continued to drag on, and with each day that passed without finding Emily, the chances of locating her seemed to diminish. The police were no closer to an answer, and the search party was starting to thin. But as the searchers began to lose hope, Max, the lost German shepherd, was about to change everything. No one had noticed him at first. He was just another stray dog, a nameless creature who wandered the streets, seemingly aimless. But soon, Max would become the key to finding Emily, and the entire town would learn that sometimes heroes come in the form of a dog with no home. The town of Westbrook, once known for its peaceful rhythm, now felt like a ticking clock. It had been over 3 days since Emily Davis disappeared, and the weight of those days had begun to press down on every street corner, every home, every heart. The search efforts had escalated. Residents and strangers alike joined the hunt, but despite their best efforts, there was no sign of Emily. The police had expanded their search radius. Helicopters flew over the town, scanning the wooded areas with infrared cameras, hoping to spot any unusual heat signatures. Search dogs were brought in from neighboring counties, trained to track human scent through dense forests and abandoned buildings. Despite these efforts, Emily remained elusive. It was as though she had simply vanished. The community, once united in its hope and determination, had begun to fracture. Despair was setting in, and the more they searched, the more they realized how little they truly knew about the town they had lived in for so long. Even the most familiar corners now felt like the edge of a dark abyss, and the streets, which were once filled with laughter and light, now carried an oppressive silence. Children, who had once played freely in the park, were now kept inside, their parents fearful of the unknown. The once bustling town square was eerily empty. Even the local cafe, usually a hub of conversation, was quiet, its patrons lost in their own thoughts. Sarah and Michael Davis could barely look each other in the eye. Their hearts, once full of hope, had been hollowed out by the uncertainty. Sarah found herself staring out the window, her thoughts consumed by the search, by the thought of her daughter lost and alone in a world she could not control. Michael, too, struggled to sleep, his mind racing with questions that had no answers. How could this happen? Where could Emily be? No one had answers, and with each passing day, the reality sank deeper. There was no sign of her. No calls, no ransom demands, no note. The only thing they had were the memories of a vibrant little girl who had disappeared without a trace. But amid this darkness, something unexpected began to stir. Max, the stray German shepherd, had been quietly present through much of the search. He wandered the streets and watched as the town scurried about, organizing search parties and scouring the woods. He'd been present since the beginning, moving silently among the human searchers as they combed through Westbrook, and his presence, though unnoticed at first, was about to become more significant. It had been a full 48 hours since the police had started their search, and it was at that moment that Max's behavior began to shift. He wasn't like the other dogs. Max didn't bark loudly or run with the crowd. He didn't pull on his leash or lunge at people for attention. Instead, he moved quietly through the neighborhood, his nose to the ground, his eyes scanning the landscape with an intensity that seemed unnatural. His movements were purposeful, and although he had no formal training as a search dog, his instincts were sharp. Max had always been an outsider in Westbrook, never fully belonging to anyone. People had grown used to seeing him around, but no one ever thought of him as a part of their community. He was just a stray, a dog with no owner, moving through life in silence. But something about this disappearance, something about Emily, seemed to ignite something deep within him. He couldn't understand the full scope of it, but he could feel the urgency, the need to find her. It was on the third day of the search, when hope was beginning to dwindle, that Max's instincts led him to a place the human searchers had neglected, the woods at the edge of town. The woods had always been a place of mystery. Dense trees, tangled vines, and thick underbrush made it an easy place for anyone to get lost. For the most part, the town had avoided venturing too deep into the forest, but now it seemed that this very place might hold the answers they were all desperately searching for. Max had been wandering near the outskirts of the woods for hours, his paws pressing against the soft earth as he moved through the shadows. His nose twitched constantly, sniffing for any sign of Emily. It was subtle at first, a faint scent that lingered in the air, barely noticeable, but undeniably there. Max's pace quickened. The scent was stronger now, clearer. It was Emily. He could smell it, deep in his senses. Without thinking, he darted deeper into the woods, following the trail that only he could see. He wasn't trained to track, but somehow, instinctively, he knew exactly where to go. His ears flicked at every sound, every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig underfoot. His body was alert, every muscle tense as he moved with purpose. The forest around him felt thick and foreboding, yet he pressed on. He was driven by a force he couldn't explain. As he moved, the trees seemed to grow denser, the light dimmer. The scent grew stronger. Max wasn't just following a trail, he was following a call. The scent led him to an area of the woods that was far from the paths the searchers had been taking. This part of the forest was known to few, and it had long been abandoned. The only signs of human activity were the occasional cigarette butts scattered on the ground. The deeper Max went, the more familiar the scent became. There, in a secluded clearing, Max found something that no one else had noticed. A faint sound caught his attention. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A whimper. Max's ears perked up, his body frozen in place. He knew that sound. He'd heard it before in the voices of dogs that were injured or frightened. This was the sound of someone in need. Max's heart raced as he followed the sound, pushing through the underbrush. He moved faster now, driven by the need to help, by the undeniable sense that Emily was near. The whimpering grew louder, more frantic, and then, as if by instinct, Max found her. At that moment, every beat of Max's heart seemed to echo the desperate need to find Emily. There was no time to waste. The scent of her, faint, yet unmistakable, still lingered in the air, guiding him further into the forest. His paws crushed the leaves beneath him, and his nose, like a compass, led him toward the heart of the woods. The deeper he went, the stronger the smell became. The sun had begun to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The eerie quiet of the woods seemed to heighten the sense of anticipation. Emily had to be here. She had to be. The moment she disappeared, Max had felt it in his bones. He didn't know how he knew, but there was no doubt in his mind. She was out here, waiting to be found, and he would be the one to bring her back. As Max pushed through the brush, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. The air around him grew heavier, filled with the scent of fear. His fur bristled, and his tail dropped as he looked around, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. There was no movement, but then, from somewhere deep within the forest, he heard it, a faint cry. It was small, barely audible, but Max's keen ears picked it up immediately. His heart skipped a beat. The sound was unmistakable. It was Emily's voice. Max didn't hesitate. His body surged forward as if propelled by a force greater than instinct alone. He pushed through the thick undergrowth, his nose tracking the faint scent that seemed to grow stronger. With every step, the cry became more distinct as he drew closer. It was muffled and desperate, a sound that sent shivers down his spine. Emily was in trouble. She was here, somewhere just beyond his reach. And then he saw it. Through the trees, a small clearing came into view, and there, half hidden behind a pile of discarded wooden planks and debris, was Emily. She was lying on the ground, her hands bound tightly to the wooden frame of an old shed. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with fear. She was shaking, but the moment she saw Max, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. It was as if time itself had stopped. Emily, who had been trapped in this dark, abandoned corner of the world, now found herself looking at the one thing she had desperately hoped for, a sign of life, a sign of hope, and that sign had 4 legs and fur. Max barked once, loud, sharp, a call for help. His ears flattened as he ran toward her, his paws heavy against the earth. He could feel the heat of Emily's fear, the terror that radiated from her small form, but he also sensed something else, a flicker of hope, however faint, that she hadn't given up yet. Emily's hands were bound tightly behind her back, and her face was bruised from the rough treatment. But despite everything, her eyes lit up when she saw Max. "Max," she whispered, her voice cracking as she reached out to touch his fur. "You found me." Max licked her face gently, his tail wagging slightly, trying to reassure her. It was as though he knew what she needed most in that moment. He wasn't just a dog, he was her protector, the one who would bring her home. Max's nose nuzzled at the ropes that bound her hands, but they were tied too tightly for him to untie. He pawed at the knots, his eyes darting back and forth as he tried to figure out a way to help. Emily's body trembled, and Max could sense her fear, but he also knew that he couldn't leave her alone here. Not now. He barked again, a loud, urgent cry that seemed to fill the clearing. There was no time to waste. She was so close to being safe, but the situation was still dangerous. He needed to get her out of there, away from whatever had brought her to this place in the first place. Max turned back toward the trees and barked again, louder this time, as if to signal the humans. The sound echoed across the forest, carrying far beyond the clearing. His bark was different now, more frantic, as though he was screaming for help. The searchers had been combing the woods for days, but no one had thought to venture this far into the dense forest. Max was their only chance now, and he wasn't about to let them down. In the distance, the sound of Max's barking reached the ears of the searchers. Police officers, volunteers, and neighbors, everyone who had been desperately looking for Emily, heard the call and rushed toward it. Their legs burned with exhaustion, but they didn't slow down. Not now, not when they were so close. The night was creeping in, and the shadows in the forest seemed to stretch longer, deeper, as though the darkness itself were swallowing the light. But they didn't care. Not anymore. They pushed through the trees, their breath coming in heavy gasps as they followed Max's frantic barks, growing louder with each step. They had to reach him. They had to find Emily. And then there he was. Max burst through the underbrush, his eyes wide with urgency, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. Behind him, the faintest light broke through the trees as the searchers emerged from the shadows. Max led them to the clearing, where Emily lay. The moment Sarah and Michael saw their daughter, a collective gasp escaped from their lips. But before they could move toward her, something stopped them. Max, he was standing between them and Emily, his body rigid, his ears flattened against his head, his eyes locked onto the searchers, with a look that spoke volumes. He wasn't going to move until they were sure it was safe. He had found Emily. He wasn't about to let anyone take her from him. Sarah dropped to her knees as she reached out for her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "Emily," she cried, her voice choked with relief. "Oh my God, baby, you're okay." Emily didn't answer immediately. She just stared at her mother, disbelief written across her face. She couldn't comprehend that this was real, that her mother was finally here, that she was no longer alone. She had spent the last several days in isolation, uncertainty, and fear. But now, in this moment, all of it disappeared. "Mom, Dad," Emily whispered, her voice shaking. "Max, he saved me." Max's tail wagged slowly as he stepped aside, allowing Sarah to embrace her daughter. The reunion was everything. It was raw. It was messy. It was emotional. It was the culmination of days filled with darkness and fear. But it was also the beginning of a new chapter for this family. A chapter made possible by the unwavering loyalty of a stray dog named Max. Max stepped back, watching the reunion unfold with quiet satisfaction. He didn't need words. He didn't need thanks. He had done what he was meant to do. He had brought Emily home. The police officers stood at the edge of the clearing, their hands clasped behind their backs. They watched the reunion, but they didn't intrude. They had seen the bond between Max and Emily, and they knew that this wasn't just a rescue story. This was something deeper, something that words couldn't capture. As Sarah and Michael held Emily in their arms, they turned their attention to Max. He had been the one to find her, to bring her back when no one else could. He had been their beacon of hope when everything else seemed lost. And now, the town of Westbrook had a new hero. The next few days were filled with celebrations. The community rallied around Emily and her family, showering them with love and support. But amid the celebrations, one thing remained clear. Max was no longer a stray. He was family. He had saved a life. More than one, really. He had saved Emily's. And in doing so, he had brought a fractured community back together. Max found a new home with the Davis family, and the town made sure that no one would ever forget the German Shepherd who had risked everything to save a young girl. His story became legend, one that would be told for generations to come. But more than that, it was a reminder of the unspoken bond between animals and humans, a bond that could never be fully understood, but was felt deeply through every action and every moment of pure loyalty. And as the days passed, Max, now a hero, walked proudly through the streets of Westbrook, a reminder that sometimes heroes don't wear capes. They have paws. The days that followed Emily's rescue felt like a dream. The sun shone brighter in Westbrook, and the sky seemed just a little bit clearer. The relief that had washed over the town was palpable, and the once somber streets now felt full of life once more. It wasn't just the return of a missing girl that had made the town feel alive again. It was the deep, unspoken bond between a community and the extraordinary dog who had brought her back. Sarah and Michael Davis, though emotionally drained, were grateful beyond measure. They had been to the brink of despair, their hearts shattered by the uncertainty of those endless days. But now, looking at their daughter, alive, safe, and wrapped in the warmth of her family, they knew that everything had changed. They had been given a second chance, and it was a gift they would never take for granted. As for Emily, the days following her rescue were a blur. She spent time with her family, recovering from the trauma she had endured. The physical wounds were healing, but it was the emotional scars that would take longer to fade. However, one thing was certain. Emily would never forget Max, the German Shepherd who had saved her life when no one else could. She was often seen in the backyard, playing with him, the dog that had become a hero in her eyes. They had an unspoken understanding, a silent bond forged in the darkest of times. Max had brought her back from the edge of an unimaginable nightmare, and in return, Emily made sure he would never feel alone again. Westbrook, too, began to heal. The town had been through a lot. Emotions had run high, and fear had taken root where there was once only peace. The search for Emily had brought strangers together, some from neighboring towns, all united by one common goal, to bring the young girl back home. The collective effort had shown the true strength of the town's heart, but it had also exposed the vulnerability of a community that, for the first time in years, was forced to face its own fears. In the days after Emily's rescue, the townspeople found themselves drawn closer together. The bonds forged during the search for Emily remained strong. People hugged each other a little tighter, shared meals together a little longer, and spoke to each other with more care and consideration. Westbrook was no longer just a quiet town. It was a town that had experienced something extraordinary, and they knew it was something they would never forget. Max, the stray German Shepherd who had wandered the streets unnoticed for so long, had found his place in the Davis family. Emily's parents, Sarah and Michael, had quickly realized that Max was more than just a hero. He was family. In the weeks that followed, they showered him with affection and care, ensuring that he knew he had found a home, one that he would never have to leave. Max's transformation was remarkable. The dog who had once been a quiet observer of the world around him was now an integral part of the Davis household. He slept by Emily's bed at night, as if guarding her, his presence offering comfort and security. And when Emily smiled, as she often did while playing with him in the yard, it was clear that their bond was unbreakable. The town also began to show their gratitude to Max. The local newspaper ran an article calling him Westbrook's hero. Children and families visited the Davis household to meet the dog who had saved a life, and Max received a hero's welcome wherever he went. The town's folks recognized that Max was no longer just a stray. They saw him as the protector of their town, the hero who had bridged the gap between fear and hope. One afternoon, the local bakery even baked a special batch of dog treats, dedicating them to Max. They were decorated with a simple message: to the dog who saved our hearts. Max had always been the humble type, but that day, when Emily handed him a treat, There was a sparkle in his eyes that spoke volumes. He was loved, he was wanted, and he was finally home. As the months passed, the pain of those harrowing days began to fade into memory. Emily resumed her normal life, playing with her friends, riding her bike around the neighborhood, and doing the things that 10-year-olds do. But there was one thing that had forever changed in her perspective on life, on safety, and on the power of loyalty and love. She often told her friends about the adventures she'd had with Max, recounting the story of how the brave dog had saved her from the woods. She described how Max had been her protector, her hero, when no one else could help. She spoke of him with a tenderness that only someone who had been touched by true love could express. Her friends, amazed by the story, would often come over to the Davis house just to meet Max. They marveled at how calm and gentle he was, how he never seemed to tire of their attention. They, too, saw the same thing that Emily had come to realize. Max was more than just a dog. He was a guardian, a friend, and a constant source of comfort. Max never sought attention, but the bond between him and the Davis family was clear to anyone who saw them together. There was a kind of silent understanding between them, a language of love and loyalty that needed no words. Every time Emily hugged Max, or ran her fingers through his fur, or simply sat by his side, it was as if they were both saying, without speaking, that they would never let each other go. In the fall, just a few months after Emily's return, the town of Westbrook held a celebration in honor of Max and Emily. It was a small ceremony, but it was packed with emotion. The entire town gathered at the community park, where the mayor made a speech praising the heroism of Max and the bravery of Emily. "We've seen many acts of kindness in this town," the mayor said, standing at the podium, "but none have been as extraordinary as the bond between this little girl and this brave dog. Max, you showed us what loyalty, courage, and love truly mean. And Emily, you remind us of the strength we all carry inside, even when faced with the darkest of situations." There were tears in the crowd, and many of the townspeople found themselves wiping away their own emotional responses. It wasn't just a celebration of a rescue. It was a celebration of community, of hope, and of how love can emerge from the most unlikely of places. At the end of the ceremony, the mayor unveiled a plaque in Max's honor, a permanent reminder of the heroic German shepherd who had saved Emily and forever changed the course of their town's history. Life in Westbrook had returned to normal, but it was a new kind of normal, one where the town had learned the importance of unity, of staying strong in the face of adversity, and of never taking the safety of their loved ones for granted. As for Emily, she was no longer just a girl who had gone missing. She was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a chance for hope. And Max, the stray dog who had wandered the streets, had become a symbol of loyalty, of the deep, unspoken bond between animals and humans. Max and Emily shared a bond that would last a lifetime, and as they grew older, their story would become a part of Westbrook's legend, one that would be passed down through generations. The story of the lost German shepherd who saved a kidnapped girl, and the town that came together to celebrate the extraordinary power of love, loyalty, and bravery. No one would ever forget the incredible heroism of Max, the dog who saved a life and changed a town forever. If Max's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today. And make sure to watch our next video for more incredible stories like this.